Hello, you're watching a video review of the English Second Language textbook series Ventures by Cambridge University Press. I believe they're on second edition, third edition, the most recent one that came out. Uh, my name is Russell Purple. I am a working English Second Language teacher. I am teaching adult immigrants at a local community college here in the United States. I have worked with children in the past, adults, worked abroad, worked here at home, obviously, college students. Currently, now, in addition to teaching at a college, I also instruct students online, freelance, mostly adult students online. Um, I am not affiliated with Cambridge University Press or any other textbook publisher. I am not a writer of textbooks. I am not associated or having any vested interest in any way. As you can see, these videos are pretty casual. Just me talking here. I made some notes to remind myself of everything I wanted to say, but production value is none. I will not be showing the textbooks in any way here, even though that would probably be useful to do because I'm kind of stupid when it comes to copyright laws and infringement, and I don't want to take any risks there. And also, I don't have a textbook physically with me here. So, again, today, talking about ventures. I have been using Ventures myself for not even a full year now. This is my first encounter with the series. I never used any of the previous editions, but it has quickly become uh, one of the most useful textbooks for me. I hesitate to say favorite because, again, I'm not trying to persuade you to buy anything or anything like that. And different textbooks are useful for different situations, different types of students. Um, I'd also mention here, in terms of who should be watching this video, I realize I am talking from a teacher's perspective, but in my opinion, if you are learning English, it is best to do this with a tutor or with a learning partner of some sort. And even now, I think textbooks are generally the best resource for providing some framework, some structure for your lessons. I have very few students who I do not use any sort of textbook at all with, no matter how conversational, how casual the language gets. So, if you are an English learner, and I suppose your level is fairly advanced if you're watching this and following along, because I'm not even really using a teacher voice here, just kind of talking normal. If you are an English student, I do recommend you exploring textbooks for yourself and finding what might work best for you and talking with an instructor or a tutor about possibly using it or something else, you know. Um, so, anyways, back to it. So, as I said, I've been using this textbook for maybe 8 months. I've used it at every level with beginner students who know almost zero English to very advanced students who speak English about as well as I do. You know, I use it. I've used it in my classroom in a few different ways. Sometimes using it as a complete class text and simply teaching parts of it in a kind of instructed lesson. But more often, I use it for individualized instruction, where each student is working at their own level with their own book, and I am simply allowing them to teach themselves and go through it themselves. I have also used this book for online teaching. So, with the PDF, with a scanned version of the book, simply going through and working through the book with individual students. Um, so very useful for both. And that's a very important and useful thing to note is that this has a versatility to be used for classroom instruction, for individual in-person instruction, or for tele instruction, for remote internet instruction. very effectively. Excuse me. Very casual video here. I will note that this book is, just to give you a basic description of this book, it is for adult learners. Typically, it's for work readiness. So what I mean by that is it's not necessarily geared towards preparing students for university or educating students who are currently in university. Not it could conceivably be okay for teenagers, um, and it is not a course for not completely useful for a student in a very particular profession who is trying to learn English for survival in that profession. You know, it's very very much geared towards working adults learning English. So it has a mix of casual, conversational English, survival English, and also some level of business English, which kind of increases as you get further along in the difficulty of this series. What else might be useful to know about it? There are 6 levels. The very beginning level, which is in theory for students who have zero encounter with English at all. It's very hard to find a student with zero encounter with English, but um, for the students who have little English coming in, I find that better than most textbooks I've used, it does manage to hit a very, very low English level very well, all the way up to level 6, which is advanced English. In theory, preparing for maybe university or maybe some kind of advanced study, or of course entering the workforce or moving up in the workforce. So 6 levels. Um, Another very nice thing to note about them, all the audio is built in QR codes that are scannable via a phone. So if you're using this in a classroom setting, uh, any student can play their own audio pretty much. It's pretty easy to download a QR reader to use. And of course, it makes it, the very important thing about it is if you have 2 students working on different things, different levels, even just a different chapter in the lesson, they can each play their own separate audio. And of course, online, if you're teaching online, some platforms make it very easy to share the audio of your computer to the other student's computer. Some platforms don't. And I find that it will sound a little ridiculous, but I can just scan the code directly on my screen, hold it up to my headset, and the student can hear it. So that's pretty cool, actually. It's pretty convenient. Um, so that's the basic details of it. Just to give you an idea, again, I'm trying to the best of my ability, paint a picture for you of what this book series is, not having simply looked at it yourself. And also, I'm sorry, just something else occurred to me. Another thing to know about the audio that's very important is it's very available, right? If you need to get the audio, you can download it on the website. Obviously, you can simply scan each QR and load it that way. Very convenient. No hard situation of trying to find and purchase CDs or trying to find the file somewhere. Very, very available audio. So, okay. So each book is about 10 chapters, or units, I should say. Each unit consists of first an intro lesson. Units are organized by kind of big topics like personal information, health, um, directions and driving around town, and I guess naming buildings in town, um, work, occupations, etc. First, there is a big picture in each lesson, and I'll go through some of these things in more detail a little later. I'm trying to remind myself not to talk too much about the picture or anything else right here, because I'm just trying to give you an outline. Big picture. Um, listening file, and an introduction to some of the words and phrases that they're teaching in that lesson. Next, they have usually 2 grammar points. So they have a grammar lesson tied into, of course, the topic of the lesson. Then there's a reading section. Then there's a writing section. And then there is kind of a review or a more information, different random topics section, right? So let's see. One thing I will mention now, although I'll mention again later, is each section. So if you're in the reading section, end of the reading section, it's a conversation prompt. If you're in the grammar section, end of the grammar section, conversation prompt. And I'll also mention each one of these sections is about 2 pages long. So hopefully you have some vague idea of the arrangement of the book. I'll also mention at the end of the book there are kind of more test-like reading excerpts with questions, but I haven't used them very much, so I can't talk too deeply about those. Excuse me, about those, but they are there. They're pretty cool. I think they're pretty good. I don't tend to teach students who are so obsessively preparing for some kind of big exam or something. And if I do, which I do have some that do, typically this is not the best textbook for that, because it's not that intensive for those things. But on that note, let's enter the review part proper, saying what's good about it, what's bad about it. So let me tell you about the good things first. First thing, very important, it is a very simple book. It's very simply designed. The size of the chunks of information, let's say, are pretty small and easily digestible. If there's a reading, the reading is about this big. It's very digestible for a student. Not so much that you get bogged down on. All of the lessons and all of the activities you're doing, it's pretty easy for a student, even with no teacher at all, to figure out, okay, what does it want me to do here, and then do it. And most of the activities, the style of activity repeats. So even if they have trouble figuring it out once, they'll figure it out. They'll still know next time. So the simplicity of the book, in fact, I think is one of the things that I like the most about it, because typically students, they follow along very easily. They feel very relaxed doing it. And as a teacher, I feel very relaxed too, because I know with just a little preparation what exactly it's going to have me do. It's very easy to guide the student through. And yeah, there are some books where the lessons are very complicated. They are doing many different things. And while I like these books, I find that it takes a much higher level of um, effort from both the student and the teacher, which, of course, as the teacher, you're always trying not to work too hard. But as a student, you should not choose a book, or it's not always good to have a book that you are putting so much of your mental effort into just reading the instructions, just figuring out the activity, because while that is a useful comprehension of a language activity, it is not exactly learning the language, and you want to spend as much of your effort as possible learning the language. Okay, but I can feel myself getting very long-winded. So as I mentioned before, this book, you can use it as a teacher with a student, or the student can use it almost completely on their own. It is, of course, very important to have a teacher there for the speaking practice aspect of it, and to explain some things and to check and make sure you're doing everything right, to give you that guidance you need. But generally speaking, there's a very high level of independence in this book, and that's very useful. Of course, this book is, being that it's new, it is a current up-to-date book. It has the feeling of being up to date. Sometimes use an older book and some different issues you might run into. The language feels a little old-fashioned. The topics don't feel current anymore. Even just the design, it's kind of funny how graphic design can make you feel like the book is not current in a way that kind of demotivates you. This book feels very current and up to date. Um, Again, each unit starts with a nice big picture with many things going on in it. Some of them are illustrated, some of them are kind of photo pictures, and they're very useful for this activity of talking about a picture with your student. Because, as I said, there's a lot going on, lots of things to say about it, very well targeted to the topic you're discussing. Very good way to review the material later. It's very good. I think it's one of the best things about the book. It's so funny. Like, a picture is such a simple thing, but I think many English teaching textbooks, they forget how useful a nice big picture with lots of things happening in it can be, and they just neglect to put one in there. And then after that happens, we as teachers forget to always try to talk to our students about the pictures we do find in the textbook. It's very nice to find a book where even with a very advanced level student, you can discuss what you're looking at in a picture and not feel strange like you're belittling them. So these books have pretty good pictures for that. Uh, the pacing, I would say, simplicity, as I said, is probably one of the biggest key factors of this book because it's very easy for the students to know and understand where they are in the book and what they're doing and how to do it. The next biggest thing I would say is the pacing of the book. Each lesson, I would say lesson because the lessons will not necessarily take a whole hour or something, but we'll talk about that later. But each lesson um, is broken down in such a way that you have some instruction there around the top. You have some practice with the lesson, whatever it is, the grammar aspect or the words or whatever. You have some slightly less guided practice, and then you have conversation. And that in a book, I think, is a little rare to see them do such a good job of lacing in the conversation prompts inside of each lesson. And I will say also, and this is my next point, the conversation prompts are usually quite good. Usually it is something that most students and most teachers can talk about pretty easily without this feeling of having to make a big effort or talking about something that feels a little awkward or fake. So just the just for the just for the I'm sorry, blanked out completely trying to think of a word. Just for the frequency of conversations alone and the quality of the conversation topics, I think is puts this book pretty high up there in the rankings. Um, and then the other thing I'll just note is it is aligned to. I don't want to use industry jargon because I'm not even that up on it myself, but essentially the standards for adult education and work readiness education in the United States we're expected to follow now. So if you're actually in a college or something teaching and those standards are something you're being expected to meet, you can rest easy that if you have this book, the standards are good. Um, as far as the cons, the negative things about this book go, there are some. And there are some that make it a reason why I would not choose this book at all for certain students or certain situations. One is the simplicity is nice, but in some ways it is a bit too simple, right? So, especially if you are working with students or if you are a student who has been practicing English for some time, or if you are a very advanced student, um, the amount of information that you're being taught with each lesson. I just thought of another thing, so let me put a note right here. Is not enough, really. It's much less than you could really than you are really able to absorb. So maybe you would say it lacks rigor to some extent. I think that this series really excels well on a beginner to elementary to pre-intermediate level, where a lot of textbooks, I think, they don't do a good job of getting into that mindset of English learner who could not possibly understand this whole block of text or this exercise. What is it asking me to do? Ventures does a very good job with those students, but as it gets higher up, first, it simply doesn't push the students quite as far as a student maybe could be pushed. And then once you get so advanced, there really is not enough challenge or enough new information there for them at all. That's one of the biggest things I'll say about this. One of the biggest qualifiers about ventures and recommending it is I don't think this book series. I don't think the level 6 book is really worthwhile for most advanced learners. I think there are much better book series that could teach them a lot more. This one, oftentimes, if I am using it with a very advanced student, it kind of feels like they're just doing a review of things they already know quite well, which is it's useful for a student, to review, to practice and become more comfortable with the English, but it is not the best use of their time, you know. I would also say, in terms of the pictures again, which, as I said before, I really like. I like some of the pictures. For some reason, in the lower level textbooks, they are illustrated with drawings, drawn illustrations mostly. And these pictures are very good. I mean, you can kind of see the benefit of being able to, as an artist, draw exactly what you want the picture to have, right? Um, but in the higher levels, again, I don't know why, but in the higher levels, they seem to be using stock photos that were not taken for the express purpose. And the two issues I have with it is one, it's a little silly because they'll have like about 6 photos, maybe trying to tell or trying to give some illustration of a story or a topic the student will hear, and people who are intended to be the same person or something will not even be the same person in the photos. And the other thing I'll say, my bigger complaint is there just usually isn't a whole lot going on in these photos to talk about. You can basically say what the person's doing, maybe if you're lucky, what facial expression they have, and what they're wearing, which usually isn't very complicated. So while pictures are very useful, and some of the pictures in the series are very excellent, especially when you get into the later books, the pictures just don't have much worth talking about by themselves. And of course, I'm sure a very creative teacher or a very creative student can find lots of things to say by just this little prompting of conversation that a picture provides, but a richer picture they would be able to say even more about. So why not have some richer pictures? Um, Next thing I would say is the grammar lessons in these books. I think they are very good in that it's very short, digestible information. I think they do a pretty good job of creating a grammar chart that's very small yet still very easy to read. But at the same time, I think that they, while they are pretty good for student self-led, okay, let me take a look at this grammar. point and try to figure out what it's saying. It has an accompanying video. This is the only part of the lesson where you read that same QR code and it takes you to a video, which is very good. I think that there's not a lot there for a teacher to instruct the student with in this kind of teacher-student interaction. For that, you have to go to the whiteboard and write your own notes, or if you're using a video conferencing software, go to some open document or something and make your own notes. I would say in that sense, the grammar lessons, they're not the best in the world. And also I would say, again, there's a real lack of complexity for a very high performing student, where it's very rare to find a extensive list of rules, right? Whereas you might in a different book. And the last thing I'll say here, pretty small point, because I don't know how much of it is just me personally, but so each lesson is intro, grammar, reading, writing, extra. I find the writing section to just not be that useful, not that enjoyable for the students, doesn't feel that authentic, like they're really writing about things in a way that they might in real life. Just not that interesting. I obviously I don't use it. Basically, I use very little of it whenever I'm doing one-on-one instruction in a lesson online. In terms of my real classroom setting, my physical classroom setting, the students use it, but I don't find that they're getting a lot of use out of it. I don't know how to put that better. It's a little hard to explain. It's a variety of, some students just aren't doing it at all, or aren't doing it with very much effort put into it. Other students are maybe doing it, but the product they're producing doesn't seem that creative or authentic. And then other students are, maybe they're doing the writing, but they just don't like it very much. Maybe more interesting topics would be the solution. I don't know. But that's probably my least favorite part of the book. I just find myself, even though I don't have any specific objections about the writing, I just find myself and my students using it the least. I'd much rather just ask them a question to write about or something like that, and I find the results are better. One last thing to note about this book, and then finally I'll stop talking to you. I will say the students tend to move through this book pretty quickly. Of course, depending on their level of English going in. These books, even when it is not too easy for them, still the lessons are pretty short. One thing is, if you are looking for something where your student gets a lot of practice on one subject or one topic, this book isn't really it. You got to find something extra to give them, to add to it. And just generally speaking, if you're using this book with a student, they will probably move through it quite quickly. Like, I've gone through a full unit in an hour before, sometimes maybe even more. I'm not sure though. So not necessarily a bad thing, because you don't want the opposite situation where you're just like trudging through the mud trying to get through, and you feel like, oh, all I taught my student today was just one pronunciation tip, and that was it, because we had to go through all this stuff about it. You don't want that either, of course. But there is some worry that if they only saw this particular grammar idea for 20 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever, before they just completely finished, exhausted all work and all conversation about it, did they really learn it? So I do know that there's a workbook in addition to the textbook, and there is some kind of online software that goes with it as well. But I have not used these myself, so Probably they go a long ways towards addressing this issue, but as far as just a textbook to use for the bulk of your work with a student, you can possibly come into the problem of needing to supplement it somehow with something else. Okay, so thanks for listening. This is kind of a little hobby or side project type thing I am trying out now, so um, hope it was useful for you. I know that as an English teacher, there are so many available resources out there for me, and it's hard to tell which ones are useful without really looking at them real hard and trying to investigate them, and a lot of them really aren't that useful. So I'm hoping that this could be a worthwhile thing for English teachers to use. So thank you very much. Have a good day, and I think I will probably be back with another review sometime in the future. Bye.